Chapter 10. Departure from Earth. Look how I go, swifter than an arrow from the Tartar's bow. Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 1, Scene 2. The interior of the car was a circular room 16 feet in diameter and 20 feet high, the walls of a bright blue color and 2 feet thick, the floor of a dark blue metal, a large circular window in the roof, and 6 small double-sliding windows of transparent crystal extending around the room. 3 were provided with powerful telescopic lenses, a cushioned seat around the room. Beneath it were hampers of provisions, water, and extension cots. An air generator and instrument for measuring altitude, speed, temperature, etc., affixed to the walls. A few chairs and a center table on which were books, astronomical charts, maps, and instruments. The room was lighted by an electric burner and warmed with a calorific apparatus, an electric cook stove. Captain Asterion introduced his 2 assistants, Bleras and Vidion, young men about his own age, of bright blue complexions. They were seated near a complex mechanism of highly polished metal communicating with the floor. We took our seats. The Raven stepped around the room, closely inspecting everything with his sharp eye, then paused near the basket of polar birds that were sticking their heads from under the cover. They stared at him, and he at them, for several minutes in blank amazement. Then, in a tone of deep commiseration, "Poor devils!" Then flopped up on the top of a clock fixed to the wall, arranged his plumage, cocked his head to one side, winked his eye, then to John. "Corp? Well, Jack? All right? I reckon. Cock-a-doo! Hooray!" Then squatting down like Poe's raven, perched, sat, and nothing more. What is the material of this car?" I asked, passing my hand over the polished walls. "A peculiar Martian metal called Alcatron, lighter than cork, 100-fold stronger than steel, and possibly remarkable magnetic properties," replied Asterion. Then, addressing his assistant, "All ready, start the batteries." Bleras and Vidion moved the levers of the machinery. The great ball on the summit of the staff threw off a shower of electric sparks with a loud snapping sound, enveloping the car like a fiery halo. It rose slowly and gracefully from the spouting masses of foam, rapidly ascending, and within 15 minutes attained the altitude of 20,000 feet in the air. As there was no balloon, such as is employed in aerostatic navigation, I was considerably astonished. "What mysterious power elevates this car?" I asked. "Underneath the floor," replied Asterion, "are ethervolts, or anti-gravitation batteries, which generate a peculiar Martian force called ma dumos. This force is so powerful as entirely overcomes the force of gravity, and elevates our car above the surface of the Earth, notwithstanding its weight. I might explain that the magnetism of the Earth has such a powerful antagonism against that of the batteries, it repels or drives the car upwards, just as a frictional electrical machinery at first attracts, then repels a pith ball or a bit of cotton brought near it." "Our scientists have no knowledge of any such wonderful power as this," said I. "Really, I'm surprised to hear that. They have something new to learn in the field of terrestrial physics. By the way, you have of course noticed in the orbital revolutions of comets around the sun that the tail of the comet always keeps away from the luminary. When the comet is approaching the sun, its tail streams out behind. When it goes around the sun, the tail sweeps around sideways. When the comet retreats from the sun, the tail always goes to the foremost. How do your scientists explain this phenomenon?" Many explanations have been offered, none of which appear to be satisfactory. One is that the sun at first exerts a powerful attraction on the comet, which, when it arrives close to it, becomes charged or saturated with the solar electricity, and on the well-known principle that opposite electricities attract, and similar electricities repel each other, the sun repels or drives the comet's tail away, until it gradually loses that electricity in its journey through space, and is again attracted by the sun, and so on. The phenomenon, however, is regarded as one of those many astronomical enigmas, the solution of which is yet unknown. and which I shall have the pleasure to explain to you hereafter. And now we come to another subject relating to our mode of interplanetary travel. Your scientists are, of course, familiar with the theory of the magnetic influences existing between your Earth and ours, and also between the other planets. The powerful magnetic influence of the Sun on his attendant planets is well known, I replied, but that your planet and ours should sustain any particular magnetic relation with each other is not even dreamed of. Is it possible? Your scientists have a new and untried field teeming with wonderful phenomena awaiting their investigation. Not only our planet and yours, but every member of the solar system is united in one common bond of brotherhood by cosmomagnetic currents running from one to another. These currents are generated at the poles of each planet, and flying with immense velocity across the great spaces lying between, join them together in one fraternal bond of union. The currents running between our planets and yours form a closed circuit connected at the poles. When we made our interplanetary journeys, we always have to start from the poles where the streams are generated and also land on the same places. We cannot start from nor land upon any other part of the planet. We are now in the return current, which is bearing us to Mars. We can regulate our speed along it at our pleasure by our batteries. When we have reached a certain distance above the Earth and are out of its attraction, I will put the car under the full influence of the current, and we shall fly at speed that will surprise you. We had now ascended 6 miles and began to experience the unusual sensation of fullness about the head, a pressing of breathing, etc., caused by the rarity of the air at these high altitudes. Asterion opened the valves of the air generator, letting in a supply of fresh air in the room, and the electric heater kept it at a comfortable temperature. In a few moments, we reached the height of 20 miles. The barometer hanging outside of the windows had run down to nearly 2 inches. The atmospheric pressure at which the surface is about 15 pounds to square inch, said Asterion, is reduced here to less than 2 ounces. Were any of us outside the car, all the fluids in the body would ooze through the outlets and pores of the skin. Which I will illustrate, said the doctor, then taking one of the penguins out of the basket and carefully opening one of the double windows to avoid escape of air, he placed the bird outside. It gave one gasp. The blood oozed from its nostrils, its eyeballs burst open, its plumage dripped with blood, its body collapsed like an empty bag. We now ascended with great rapidity. What is the estimated height of your terrestrial atmosphere? Asked Asterion. Our astronomers are not agreed on that point. Some place it at about 45 miles, others at 100 or more, I replied. How high have we ascended? He asked. 75 miles, replied Viadon, consulting the instruments for altitude. An aeronaut at this altitude over the United States could command a view extending from Boston to Glacier and Coxwell in England in 1863. An aeronaut at this altitude over the United States could command a view extending from Boston to Colorado in one hand and Lake Superior to the Gulf of Mexico on the other. Long curved lines of light, brilliant flashes now begin to appear, springing out of the darkness and shooting around us in various directions with loud hissing and occasional explosions like distant musketry. We are in the region of meteors and must keep a sharp lookout to avoid collisions, said Asterion. The showers came from all directions, and the idea of running a gauntlet through this aerial artillery, some of which might reduce our car to powder in an instant, was not pleasant to contemplate. How do you avoid collision? I asked Asterion, who was affixing an instrument resembling a photographic camera to one of the windows and arranging the lenses and plates. I photograph their approach and the lines of curvature on the plates and calculate accordingly. By checking or accelerating our speed, we can get out of their way. I don't mind the small meteorites, but the large ones might injure the car by collision. The assistants now paid close attention to the machinery, regulating the course and speed of the car during her passage through the meteor shower, as a mariner carefully steers his ship through an ice floe. Here comes a big fellow right ahead, said Asterion, who had been closely watching through the window. Check off the batteries. Vidion and Barras moved the levers, and the car stopped. Asterion looked through his camera. I've calculated its curve. It will pass about half mile to the left. The moment of great At the next moment, a great glare of light streamed in the windows. We looked out and watched the swift approach of the aerial monster. Its terrible appearances would have made the stoutest heart quail. It was a huge, blazing mass of white-hot metal or rock, big as the pyramids of Cheops, with a fiery train at least 20 miles long. It flew by with the rush and roar of 100 railroad trains. In a few seconds, it exploded in the far distance. The sky was illuminated with showers of sparkling fire, and our car rocked as if on the waves of a stormy sea. The speed of the meteorites was 500 miles a minute, said Asterion. It is wise provision of nature that such huge masses burst to fragments or are consumed to ashes while passing through the atmosphere. Else, had it fallen in any of your terrestrial cities, imagine the frightful scene. The car now ascended more swiftly, and in a few moments, Burras, who had been consulting the instruments for altitude, called out, 200 miles! We have passed through the limits of the Earth's atmosphere, said Asterion, and are entering the great gaseous envelope surrounding it, which is several hundred times lighter than hydrogen and about 8,000 miles deep. I looked through the window in the battery room below the floor. The great disk of the South Pole was black as night. Through the window in the roof, the stars shone with indescribable splendor. Their disks appeared larger, and their twinkling, the effect of atmospheric diffraction had disappeared, and now the full moon arose in all her glory. Through this attenuated gaseous medium, her appearance was far more grand and beautiful than viewed from Earth. Through the lenses of the window, her dimensions were greatly enlarged, and every detail of her topography brought out in bold relief. Her mountains, precipices, gulfs, craters, dried-up ocean beds, and arid plains, fissured and honeycombed in all directions, plainly showing the long past epoch of volcanic outbursts and geological upheavals of whose extent and tremendous power the mind can form but a feeble conception. "What do you think, Lieutenant?" asked Asterion. "Was your dead satellite ever inhabited by human beings?" "Fancy has pictured in glowing details the once happy denizens of that world, long since passed away, the theater of human greatness and glory, the scenes of human hopes and joys and sorrows," I replied. "Hi!" giggled John. "There was the old man with his bag, the dog, the tree, the old man gone to bed, can see her nose and toes sticking out from under the blanket." "Joking aside," laughed Altiphora, "as the past history of your moon is written on her face, on her fine fire-scarred face, it would almost seem as if those shadowy forms were indeed the ghosts of lost lunarians." "Must have been terribly big peoples, old man and woman pretty near 1,000 miles high," said John. 400 miles, called out Burras. Suddenly a flood of blinding light poured through the windows, so intolerably bright. We shrank back and covered our faces with our hands. It seemed as if a flaming volcano had suddenly opened before us. "Hi!" exclaimed John. "See the big sun! Whew! He shined terribly hot." We had reached the point where the sun's rays grazed the earth at the Antarctic Circle, and through this attenuated medium poured the full power of their light and heat directly upon us. The thermometer rose to 150 degrees, and the room became hot as an oven. We were panting for breath. Viviunda screened off the windows. Asterion sprayed an evaporating lotion around the room, which cooled off the torrid heat. He then inserted a smoke-tinted lens in one of the windows, which cut off the heat rays and subdued the light. Come take a solar observation," said he.
Here are some results.
"Come take a solar observation," said he. I looked through the lens, and to my astonishment, the luminary presented all those phenomena that are seen in annual eclipses by the moon, which with this extraordinary difference that, whereas in eclipse these phenomena are shown only in the ring outside of the moon's dark disk, here they were shown all over the polar surface. What influence this thin gaseous medium had in producing this effect, I know not, but all the tremendous explosions, fiery cyclones, hydrogen flames and spires, the huge spots or abysses, some of which could engulf a score of worlds like ours at once, were displayed all over the surface, and with them appeared all the varied colors shown in the solar spectrum, flashing and glittering everywhere, so that the luminary looked like a vast star-shaped rose, gleaming with a grandeur and beauty impossible to describe. "It is now midnight according to the clock, but midday according to the sun," said the doctor. "I propose we retire for the night. And in the meantime, Asterion, please transverse this gaseous envelope speedily as possible, and when you have reached the interplanetary space, let us know," said Altiphora. "I will do so," replied he. Then to Burrus, "Put a little more tension to the batteries." The cots were drawn out, and we prepared for this night. The prince, doctor, and John were soon wrapped in the arms of Morpheus, but sleep was effectively banished from my eyes, as it would have been with respect to any denizen of earth flying at such a rate and bound for another world. As the hours passed on, the silence was unbroken save by the subdued whispers of Asterion and his assistants announcing to each other the rates of speed and distances in miles as the car flew silently onwards. 1 degree Celsius, 4,000 miles, 2 degrees Celsius, 8,000 miles. We have passed through the gaseous envelope, and we are now entering the interplanetary space. Shall we wake up the prince? No, let him sleep on with his friends. 3 degrees, 30,000 miles, 4 degrees Celsius, 60,000 miles. Put a little more tension on the batteries. "Asterion," I whispered, "how fast are we going?" 1,000 miles a minute. 100 times as swift as a cannonball. Heavens, what a tremendous speed! Our ether volt is merely taking a quiet walk. A walk? Great Scott! How is he on a trot? Makes pretty fair time. On a run? You can time his paces when he takes the home stretch for Mars. The home stretch, I muttered, and dropped to sleep.